He saved a screaming woman from a swarm of bees, only to discover she was a millionaire heiress escaping her own wedding. "I'm going to die. I swear if they sting me in the eyes, bury me with sunglasses." "Lady, stop moving. You're just making them angrier." What part of swarming bees do you not understand? The woods exploded with frantic noise, twigs snapping, wings buzzing, and a woman's voice rising above it all like a very stylish banshee. She barreled down the slope, arms flailing wildly, hair clinging to her sweat-soaked face, her jeans torn and her white shirt stuck to her back like a damp napkin. Behind her, a thick, angry cloud of bees swirled and dove in pursuit. Jack Turner blinked twice, standing about 30 feet away with a bundle of dry branches under one arm and a look of utter confusion on his face. He'd seen deer sprint through here, bears once. But this was new. "Over here!" he shouted, dropping the sticks. He yanked a smoldering piece of wood from his makeshift fire pit and grabbed a rag soaked in river water. "Get behind me! Smoke drives them off." The woman didn't need further instructions. She stumbled forward, half tripping over a root, and collapsed behind him. Jack waved the smoky branch in wide arcs, throwing up a thick screen of haze. The bees buzzed and circled, hesitating, then finally scattered in a whining retreat. The woman groaned. "Tell me I still have a face," she muttered. "You've got a face," Jack said. "Bit puffier than average, but it's still there." She cracked one eye open. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me today." "Busy morning." "You have no idea." He helped her into the small wooden cabin nearby, guiding her to a bench made of old crates and soft blankets. Her hands were shaking. Angry red welts bloomed across her cheeks, arms, and neck. One eye was swelling. Her bottom lip looked like it had declared war. "I've got something for the stings," Jack said, moving around the cabin with the ease of someone who lived alone and didn't much mind it. He returned with a jar of thick, greenish salve and a pair of tweezers. "I need to get the stingers out. This might pinch a bit. Go for it. At this point, I'd let you shave my head if it helped." He crouched beside her and got to work, moving slowly and gently. She winced at first, but didn't complain. When he paused at the edge of her collarbone, she glanced down at the path his eyes took and raised a brow. "This next one's in sensitive territory," he said. "May I?" She rolled her eyes, though her lips twitched in the beginning of a smile. "If you touch something you shouldn't, I'll let the bees finish the job." Duly noted. He was careful, professional, but still human. The nearness of her, even puffy and injured, made his hands just a little less steady than usual. He pressed the salve gently onto the side of her ribcage, and she hissed. "Sorry," he murmured. "No, it's fine. I just never thought I'd meet a stranger by screaming through a forest with insects trying to murder me." "Well," he said with a smirk, "it's a memorable first impression." She let out a wheezy laugh. "You're not so bad yourself. Saving women with tree smoke and mystery ointments. Do you rescue screaming ladies often?" "Only before lunch." "Lucky me." He finished applying the salve and offered her a cup of cold water. "Drink this. You're probably dehydrated." She took it, sipped carefully, then set it down. "Thanks. Seriously, I owe you one." He sat on a stool across from her, arms folded, expression unreadable. "So, what were you running from?" Her shoulders stiffened. For a moment, the levity vanished. Then she exhaled slowly and leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes. "Something worse than bees," she said at last. "Expectations." Jack didn't press. He nodded once, as if that was the most reasonable answer he'd heard all week. She peeked at him through her still swollen eye. "You're not going to ask what that means?" "Nope." "Why not?" He leaned back slightly. "You'll tell me if you want to, or you won't. Either way, I already saw you face down in the dirt screaming about your eyeballs. Feels like we're past the formalities." She chuckled again. "You're weird. I like it." "Good," he replied, "because I'm fresh out of normal." The two sat in companionable silence, interrupted only by the soft hum of bees far, far away and the lazy creak of the wind outside. Despite the welts and the heat and the absolute absurdity of the situation, the woman, who still had not given him a real name, felt something strange and unfamiliar. Peace. It had stung like hell to get there, but maybe, just maybe, it had been worth the swarm. By the next morning, the swelling had gone down slightly, but June, because that was the name she offered with a tired shrug, was still a mess of bumps, bruises, and half-mumbled sarcasm. She leaned on a wooden walking stick Jack had carved from a tree branch, hobbling between the bed and the porch like a grumpy pirate with a hangover. "Remind me never to piss off nature again," she groaned, collapsing into the rocking chair outside the cabin. Jack, setting a pot of something that smelled like oatmeal on a crude wood-burning stove, called out, "Nature's fine. You just pissed off the bees." She snorted. "Same thing." Tiny sky demons with wings. He stepped out, holding a bowl of steaming oatmeal. "Eat this, unless your goal is to collapse dramatically and make me carry you again." "I might fake it," she said, taking the bowl, "just to see how far you'd get before your back gives out." "You're hilarious when medicated," he said dryly. She smiled over the rim of her bowl. "Only slightly less charming than when I'm swollen and terrifying." Later that afternoon, he washed her torn shirt and hung it on a bamboo pole stuck into the ground near the cabin. When she limped out and saw it fluttering in the breeze like some war-torn flag, she squinted at him. "This your superhero cape? Bee woman?" Jack said with a smirk. "Shut up," she replied, "or I'll sting you myself." They both chuckled, and the silence afterward felt warm, comfortable. She stayed. One day turned to 2, then 3. Jack didn't ask questions. Not about her name, not about the expensive stitching on her now tattered boot, not about the hint of fear that flashed across her face every time she heard a plane overhead. In turn, June offered bits and pieces. Slivers of a story she carefully chopped into sarcasm and served with humor. "Let's just say," she said one evening as they sat outside under the stars, "I was heading toward a life that looked perfect on paper, but the paper was on fire." Jack raised an eyebrow. "That sounds vaguely ominous." "It was," she said with a smile. "A destination filled with champagne, ivory napkins, and the feeling of slowly suffocating in silk." He didn't press further. Instead, he offered her another marshmallow from the bag he kept for special occasions. They roasted them on sticks over a tiny fire pit. She dropped hers 3 times before successfully eating one. "I'm not outdoorsy," she declared, chewing. "I like my comfort. If this is a nightmare, at least give me a soft pillow." "I gave you a feather one. It's filled with crunchy mystery things," he laughed. "That's the stuffing. Builds character." On the 4th evening, June stood in front of the cracked mirror nailed to the wall near the cabin's makeshift wash basin. She leaned in, squinting at her reflection. One eye still bore a faint yellow bruise. Her lips were healing. Her cheek, once swollen, was now tender pink. Her usually styled hair hung in unwashed waves around her face. She touched her jaw with 2 fingers and let out a long, shaky breath. Jack passed by the open door, but paused when he heard her voice. For once, she murmured, "I'm not beautiful, and yet, I don't hate who I see." She hadn't meant to say it out loud. Jack didn't step inside. He simply stood there, back to her, eyes on the horizon. "You're not your face, June," he said, his voice gentle. "And you were never more beautiful than the second you stopped trying to be." She didn't answer. But when she came out a few minutes later, she sat beside him on the porch without saying a word. They just watched the trees sway. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't performing, and he wasn't rescuing. They were just 2 people, sting-sore, sunburned, and slightly broken, sharing a seat beneath the sky. The knock on the door came around noon. Jack wiped his hands on a kitchen towel and opened the cabin door to find a delivery man holding a brown paper box and squinting at a GPS on his phone. "Turner?" the guy asked. "Jack Turner?" "That's me." The man handed over the package, then peered inside the cabin. His eyes narrowed. "Whoa, sorry to stare, but she looks just like—" Jack's voice dropped, firm but polite. She's recovering. That's all you need to know." The man shrugged. "Hey, none of my business. Just, she really looks like that heiress. You know, the runaway bride? Annabelle Kensington? She was all over the news last week." Jack stiffened slightly but nodded. "Thanks, drive safe." The truck rolled off. Inside, June, no, not really June, stood by the sink, drying a tin cup. Her eyes were focused, but her hands were shaking. She had heard every word. Jack stepped inside, closed the door gently behind him, and leaned against the frame. "You gonna tell me before CNN does?" She froze. Silence hung between them, thick and uncertain. Then she sighed, slowly set the cup down, and turned to face him. "My name's not June," she said softly. "It's Annabelle Kensington." Jack didn't move. He didn't blink. She kept talking, like a dam had burst open. "I'm the daughter of Charles Kensington, yes. That Kensington, the hotels, the towers, the pre-packaged press releases. I was supposed to get married last Saturday. A wedding with 400 guests, a Swarovski crystal arch, and a string quartet flown in from Vienna, all arranged months ago, all for the brand." She laughed bitterly. "Only thing missing? Love. Or me, apparently." Jack crossed his arms, his tone calm. "And so you ran." "I ran," she said, her voice breaking. "I ran in the only direction that didn't smell like roses and publicists." Jack stared at her for a moment. Then he sighed, slow and long. "Well," he said, "you do have rich girl handwriting. The way you labeled your socks gave it away." Annabelle blinked, then snorted. "Seriously? You color-coded them?" "They were silk," she said defensively. He held up his hands. "No judgment, just saying, June never quite fit, but it was cute while it lasted." She smiled, sad. "I wanted to be her. June was fearless. She didn't owe anyone anything." Jack moved to the table and sat down. "So what now?" Annabelle sat across from him, folding her hands. "I don't know. I wasn't planning that far. I just wanted out." Jack nodded slowly. "Then stay out. Or stay here, or go wherever feels like you." She looked at him, confused. "You're not mad?" He raised an eyebrow. "You lied about your name, not about who you are. You never asked for anything, never played helpless. You helped around here even when you looked like a balloon with legs." She laughed, tears forming in her eyes. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You didn't come here as Annabelle Kensington. You came here as a girl who needed a break, and I respect that." Her lip quivered. "You're the only man I've ever met who didn't try to fix me or claim me. You just listened." He shrugged. "Not my job to fix you. I'm not a project manager." "Still," she said softly, "thank you for not asking me to explain my worth." He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the field. "You're welcome to stay, Annabelle. Or June, or whoever you feel like being tomorrow." She came up beside him, still limping slightly. "Can I be both?" He looked at her and smiled. "You already are." Outside, the trees swayed gently. Somewhere in the distance, bees hummed over wildflowers. Inside the small wooden cabin, two people stood quietly. No labels, no expectations, just a girl and a man figuring out what came next. Annabelle had never used a cast-iron skillet before. She'd seen them in catalogs, maybe even hung above a fake fireplace at a designer home shoot. But using one? Over an actual fire? That was new. "Okay, I may have misjudged the timing," she mumbled, watching the eggs burn to the bottom like a tragic art piece. Jack poked his head in from the porch. "Smells like ambition." She groaned. "Don't you dare say anything smart. I will throw this pan at your bees." He walked in, glanced at the mess, and said nothing, just calmly reached for 2 plates and scraped the edible bits into a corner of each one. She squinted at him. "You're actually going to eat that?" "Wouldn't miss it. Burnt eggs are a delicacy if you squint hard enough." She sat across from him at the little wooden table, arms crossed, watching as he took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and nodded. "You lied," she said. "About what?" "You said it was edible. That face says otherwise." He grinned, eyes crinkling. "It says, I appreciate the effort more than the taste." The next day they painted the front porch together. Jack handed her a brush, already soaked in faded green. "It's not the trendiest color, but it keeps the bees from nesting in the cracks." Annabelle dipped hers with a mock curtsy. A practical princess, finally. By late afternoon they were sunburned and splattered, and the porch looked decently uneven. "I call this section abstract resilience," she said, gesturing to her wobbly strokes. He pointed to the part where he'd accidentally leaned into wet paint. "This is my contribution. Man versus plank." Then came the honey incident. Annabelle, overly confident in her ability to reorganize Jack's shelves, had accidentally knocked over a large jar of wild honey. It hit the floor, shattered, and unleashed a sticky river that promptly attracted two very curious scout bees. "Jack," she called, backing away slowly, "I might have, created a situation." He turned just in time to see her bolt past the door, 3 bees on her trail, arms flailing exactly like the day they met. He sprinted after her, laughing. "We've come full circle, huh? I swear if they sting my butt again, I'm moving to Antarctica." He grabbed a towel and waved it over her, guiding her into the cabin, where he shut the door behind them, both of them panting and cracking up. "No more honey handling," he said, between gasps. "No more trusting me with gravity." Later, when the chaos had settled and the sun was dipping low, they sat on the porch again. The air smelled of pine and ash, their arms lightly touching, the silence comfortably full. Sometimes her fingers lingered near his, sometimes their eyes met and stayed. One night, their faces drifted closer without planning it. Her breath hitched. His hand moved gently to her cheek. She closed her eyes. The moment hovered, tender, electric, and just before their lips met. A branch cracked loudly in the woods. They jolted apart like teenagers caught under the bleachers. Annabelle pressed a hand to her chest. "Oh, God, I think I just had a heart attack." Jack, equally flustered, rubbed the back of his neck. "That was, close." They laughed, too loud and too fast, each looking in opposite directions. That night, as they sat by the fire in silence, the stars spilled across the sky like a secret only they were allowed to hear. Annabelle leaned her head back and closed her eyes. "If this is a life without luxury," she whispered, "why does it feel more full than anything I've ever known?" Jack didn't answer right away. He just reached over, took her hand, and held it without a word. Because sometimes fullness has nothing to do with what you have, it's who sits beside you after the bees are gone. It started with tire tracks. Jack spotted them first. Deep, unnatural grooves in the soft earth by the trailhead. They cut through the dirt like the heavy wheels of something built for cities, not forest. Not animal, not hiker. These were black SUV kind of tracks. Government black. Or worse, money black. He crouched beside them, fingers brushing the edge of one groove. Fresh. Heavy. Wrong. Annabelle had just finished hanging laundry behind the cab, her hand stilled mid-clothespin when she saw the look on his face. "Company?" she asked, heart hitching just a little. Jack stood slowly, jaw tightening. He didn't answer. They both knew. An hour later, the woods didn't chirp, they growled. Engines, low and deliberate, wound through the trees like a warning. Then, out of nowhere, 3 vehicles emerged, sleek, dark, windows tinted like secrets. They stopped just short of the clearing, the kind of entrance that said, "We own this place. We don't even need to knock." 2 men stepped out first, suits too sharp for nature. Then a third, taller, sharper. The air got colder around him. His eyes swept the property as if cataloging every imperfection, a porch with paint chips, a crooked fence, a line of wildflowers in a boot-shaped pot, and then his gaze landed on her. Annabelle froze. Her fingers tightened around the side of her jeans. "Dad?" Charles Kensington removed his sunglasses with the flair of someone used to cameras. The expression behind them was all control, no warmth. "There you are," he said, voice smooth, eyes steel. "Having fun playing pioneer girl?" Behind him, 3 more figures emerged, lawyers with briefcases, and that polite, practiced look of people who had ruined lives over lattes. Jack stepped forward from the porch, calm, collected, a man made of bark and beeswax. "Afternoon," he said with an edge of friendly steel. Charles barely flicked his gaze toward him. "You must be the—" "Woodsman." Jack offered a hand. "Jack Turner, farmer, bee eviction specialist, professional eggs and pan burner." Charles didn't take the hand, just turned his back on Jack and looked at his daughter. "You've made your little point, Annabelle. The rebellion's over. It's time to come home." Annabelle's voice was quiet but clear. "I'm not going back." "This?" Charles gestured at the cabin with disdain. "This is your plan? A shed with plumbing?" Jack smiled faintly. "No plumbing, actually. Rain barrels around back. Gravity-fed." "You don't get to joke," Charles snapped, turning back to Jack. "You've been harboring my daughter under false pretenses. This borders on abduction." "She ran," Jack said evenly. "I just didn't slam the door." Annabelle stepped forward. "He didn't force me, you did." The lead lawyer adjusted his glasses. "If Miss Kensington is not returned willingly, Mr. Turner could be charged with obstruction, unlawful detainment, and civil interference with a private contract." Jack blinked. "Did you just call her a contract?" Charles's voice turned hard. "You think this is about love, about feelings? This is about legacy. That wedding was worth over $1 billion in partnerships. You think your wildflowers are worth that?" Annabelle's fists clenched. "At least those wildflowers aren't transactional." Charles advanced. "This is your last chance, Annabelle. Come with us now, or we'll see you dragged out. You can sign the documents in court if you want to be dramatic." One of the guards stepped forward. Jack moved without thinking, instinctive, solid. He placed himself between them. "She's not a hostage here," he said, voice low and sure. "But I won't be the reason she loses her chance to be free." The guard didn't speak poetry. He shoved Jack hard. Jack stumbled back but stayed upright. The second shove came with a closed fist, catching Jack's jaw with a sickening crack. Annabelle screamed. Jack hit the ground, dazed, bleeding, but breathing. "That's enough," Annabelle cried, rushing to his side. She dropped beside him, hands trembling as they touched his face. Charles raised a hand. "Take her." But she didn't move. Instead, she wrapped her arms around Jack and held him like he was the only real thing in a world of staged realities and fine print. Through tears and bruises and broken illusions, she whispered, "You're the only thing I want to run to, not from." Jack looked up at her, lip bloodied, and grinned. "Well," he rasped. "That's one way to make a point." Even the lawyers paused. The guards shifted. Charles didn't speak. His silence was louder than any threat he could have given. Annabelle stood, shaking but rooted. "You can have your empire, your mergers, your reputation, but you can't have me unless I choose to be had, and I'm not yours to give away." And then, for the first time in her life, she turned her back on everything she was supposed to be and walked straight into the arms of the man who only ever asked her to be exactly who she already was. The morning after everything unraveled, the cabin was too quiet. Jack brewed coffee the way he always did, slow, steady, intentional. But the silence, where her footsteps usually padded, where her sarcastic morning groan usually echoed, settled around him like a bruise. Annabelle sat on the porch, wrapped in the oversized flannel she had stolen from his closet. Her eyes were puffy, her hair in a loose braid that still smelled faintly of lavender soap and smoke. He stepped outside, 2 mugs in hand. She took one without speaking. The silence between them was no longer warm, it was final. "I can't stay," she said at last, her voice no louder than a breath. "They'll come back. With cameras next time. With court orders. With chaos. And it'll be your land, your life. That gets burned down." Jack stared at the trees. "I don't care." "I do," she said. "I care more than I should. Enough to go." He turned to her, eyes tired but soft. "You're not protecting me. You're punishing yourself." She shook her head. "No, I'm giving myself a chance to figure out who I am, without someone always trying to decide it for me." They sat together, sipping in silence. The warmth of the coffee was a poor match for the chill creeping into both their hearts. Jack disappeared into the cabin for a moment and returned with a small jar. The first batch of spring honey, thick, golden, and barely labeled. He pressed it into her palm. "To remind you of sweetness," he said. Then, after a beat, added, "And stings." Her lips trembled. "You always know how to make things hurt and heal at the same time. Gift of the trade," he replied with a weak smile. She didn't hug him. He didn't ask her to stay. They just stood there, looking at each other like the story they had written on bark and bruise and brushstroke would never leave their skin. Then she turned, and the sound of her boots on the gravel was the loudest thing he had ever heard. 3 days later, Jack turned on the small battery-powered radio he only used when tornadoes or fire warnings were expected. This time, the storm was emotional. Annabelle Kensington, sole heir to the Kensington Group, announced this morning in a live broadcast her decision to forfeit her claim to the family fortune. The reporter's voice faded under the sound of Annabelle's own. On screen, she wore no makeup, no designer anything. Just that same flannel shirt she'd refused to return. "I've spent most of my life being groomed for a life I didn't choose," she said, her voice steady. "I don't want to live in a world where love is traded like currency. I'm not here to make a political statement. I'm just stepping out of the machine." Later that evening, Jack found a letter tucked under the doormat. The envelope was smudged with dirt, his name written in elegant, loopy cursive. Inside, "Jack, you taught me how to be real. You didn't rescue me. You made space for me to rescue myself. I can't explain everything I'm feeling because there aren't words for this kind of ache. But know this, I'm not running from you. I'm running toward the woman you saw in me. And someday, when I've become her, I hope I find you again. Still in that flannel. Still sipping terrible coffee. Still real. A." Jack folded the letter gently and tucked it into the same jar where he kept wildflower seeds. Because some things don't bloom until much, much later. The morning fog rolled in low and slow, curling around the trees like it was afraid to wake them. It settled over the porch steps, slid across the fields, and blanketed the hills with a hush so still it felt sacred. The world wasn't speaking today. It was whispering. Jack moved through his kitchen in the rhythm of habit. He didn't rush. He measured the water like he always had, letting it boil just past simmer, and then poured it over the coarse coffee grounds sitting in the paper filter. The scent rose with a quiet dignity, like something ancient and true. Outside, the porch creaked. It wasn't the wind. It was the kind of creak that came from weight. Footsteps. Familiar. Jack's hand paused mid-pour. The stream of hot water slowed, then stilled. He listened. Then, clear, teasing, and unmistakably hers, a voice floated through the mist. "This seat taken? Or do I have to fight the goats for it?" Jack turned slowly. His breath caught halfway to his lungs, and his fingers tightened on the mug. There she was. Annabelle. No makeup, no heels, no Kensington polish or press-trained posture, just a soft gray sweater that looked like it had been slept in, jeans with a tear in one knee, and that braid, loose, imperfect, gently swaying with every step she took closer, and yet in all the unpolished simplicity she had never looked more composed. He opened the screen door slowly, almost afraid it would dissolve if he moved too fast. She stepped up onto the porch like she had never left it, her boots brushing against the same floorboards she once helped repaint. Her eyes skimmed the details, her paint smudge on the railing, the little bee carving they had joked about, the half-empty jar of honey still warming on the windowsill. "Coffee still terrible?" she asked, voice soft. "Worse," he replied, his throat thick. She smiled. "Not for show. not to disarm, just because. He handed her a mug. Their fingers met, and in that tiny accidental touch, every day apart felt like a string pulled tight then gently released. The tension didn't vanish, but it softened. They sat on the porch swing, shoulder to shoulder, the fog wrapping around them like a blanket stitched by the trees. The only sounds were the quiet creak of wood, the rustling of a distant breeze, and the faint, questioning bleat of a goat who clearly remembered her. "I thought about sending a letter," she said after a while, "or a postcard, maybe even a dramatic apology video with violin music, but none of it felt like me. At least, not anymore." He didn't look at her, just nodded once, slow. "So I came back," she finished. A pause. Then he glanced sideways. "Because?" She exhaled, long and slow. "Because I ran. I healed. I even tried to forget. But nothing ever felt like home. Until this porch, and you." Jack didn't say anything at first. His jaw worked quietly, his eyes on the hills that were starting to rise out of the fog. "You figured it all out?" he asked eventually. She chuckled, low and real. "Not even close. But I figured out enough to know where I want to be while I keep figuring." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind that only came after everything had already been said, and saying it again would just be echo. Finally, he cleared his throat. "So, what now?" Annabelle sipped the coffee, then made a face. "Still tastes like burnt hope." He grinned. "I never promised good coffee, just consistent disappointment." She turned toward him. The teasing fell away. Her expression softened. "What now is?" "I'd like to stay, not as a guest, not as a story that ran away, just as me. The woman who chose to come back, the woman who finally wants to stop running." He looked at her, and in her eyes, he didn't see the press releases or the headlines. He didn't see the scandal or the escape. He saw June. He saw Annabelle. He saw a girl who had once screamed about bees, and a woman who now wanted to plant lavender where she used to hide. He smiled, just a little. "The chair's still warm. You never really left." She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding and rested her head on his shoulder. The fog was lifting now, unraveling at the edges, and with it, so was the weight of everything they'd left unsaid. The world wasn't whispering anymore. It was waiting. 1 year later, the cabin wasn't just a cabin anymore. The porch had been expanded. There were flower boxes beneath the windows, brimming with wild daisies and sage. The once crooked path had been lined with stones, each painted by visitors who came and went with more than just luggage. They brought stories, scars, and the slow, aching hope for something gentle. Above the front gate, a hand-carved wooden sign read, "The Hive You Choose," a place for the lost to land. It was a retreat now, a quiet sanctuary nestled among the hills, where people came to breathe, to unplug, to remember how to laugh again. They planted herbs. They learned to bake bread over fire. They helped care for the bees, and in the process, realized they were less afraid of stings than they were of never being seen. Annabelle ran workshops on writing for healing, using her own journey as an anchor. Her memoir, The Heiress Who Ran Into Herself, had gone viral, not because it was juicy, but because it was honest. Jack, meanwhile, hosted Sweet Love, Slow Living tours, where he taught city dwellers how to spot ripe fruit, listen for rain, and, his most controversial advice, how to live a full day without checking your phone. They'd even been on a podcast together. Jack had said all of 3 sentences. Annabelle had filled the rest, proudly declaring him the only man who could make honey feel philosophical. But at night, after the last campers zipped their tent, after the goats had been herded into the barn, and after the sky stretched wide with stars, the place returned to just being a home. On one such night, with the moon low and the crickets singing back up, Annabelle curled up in Jack's lap on the porch swing, their legs tangled under a wool blanket. She wore one of his shirts and smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. He nuzzled his chin into her hair. "You tired?" "Not really," she whispered. "Just happy, which is terrifying." Jack laughed softly. "That's the most Annabelle answer I've ever heard." She poked his side gently. "Want to hear a line I almost put in the book but thought was too cheesy?" "Absolutely." She pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. "Bees sting. Love heals, but both stay loyal to their hive." Jack blinked, then smiled. "That's not cheesy. That's perfect." "Well," she said, leaning in close, "let me give you something sweeter." Their kiss was soft, familiar, like the last page of a story you never want to end. From inside the cabin, a light flickered on. "Mom?" came a sleepy voice. Jack stood slowly, lifting Annabelle with him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She brushed the hair from her face and turned toward the door. "Coming, sweetheart?" Their daughter, 6 years old, wide-eyed, brave in all the ways her mothers before her never got to be, had nightmares sometimes, and each time Annabelle went to her with honey on a spoon and a whisper that said, "Even brave girls get scared." Later, when the little girl had drifted back to sleep, they walked hand in hand through the rows of lavender. The sky was turning orange at the edges, morning was coming, but so was everything else. New arrivals, new stories, new reminders that love didn't come from running or staying, it came from choosing. Again and again. At the far end of the field, Jack stopped, pulled Annabelle close, and kissed her forehead. She smiled. "We're a strange little hive," she said. "And yet," he whispered, "I'd never want to belong anywhere else." And together, with their child between them and the horizon ahead, they walked slowly toward the warmth of home. Thank you for joining us on this soul-stirring journey, a story that began with a swarm of bees and led to something far sweeter. A love that healed, a home that chose you back, and a woman who finally became herself. If this story made you smile, shed a tear, or simply believe in second chances, don't forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe to We bring you real emotion, cinematic storytelling, and the kind of endings that stay with your heart long after the screen fades to black. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing family of story lovers who believe that even the messiest moments can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Until next time, keep your heart open, your feet grounded, and remember, sometimes all it takes is the right sting to find the sweetest home.